Star Wars: The Old Republic was EA's answer to the MMO juggernaut World of Warcraft, developed by the beloved at the time RPG veterans at BioWare, said to have one of the highest budgets in gaming, rumored at $200 million. The only thing higher was expectations for the game. SWTOR built off the single-player games Knights of the Old Republic and its sequel. Both are critically acclaimed gems from BioWare, who is amassing a treasury with gems like Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter Nights, Jade Empire, Dragon Age, and of course, Mass Effect. But despite BioWare's past success, the Old Republic was still a risk. Not only was it the first MMO BioWare had done, but they opened up a new studio to helm the project, BioWare Austin. To minimize that risk, BioWare wanted to play into their strengths by focusing on the story elements of the MMO, going as far as having fully voiced characters throughout the narrative, something that was not done in the MMO genre and undoubtedly added to the already high development cost. Star Wars: The Old Republic was released to much anticipation in December 2011, with the standard subscription model. Despite the overly saturated MMO market at the time, EA BioWare was confident leading up to the release, as evidenced by their budget, and it worked. BioWare's investment seemed to pay off. According to EA's own 2011 financial report, Star Wars: The Old Republic had sold over 2 million copies, with nearly 1.7 million active subscribers. This had not covered the record-breaking development cost, but was a good sign. Sadly, this trend would not continue. By March of 2012, just 3 months after release, subscriber numbers were still around 1.7 million. This is by no means inadequate for a new MMO, but shows that not only was the game not growing, but that a decent percentage of people had ended their subscription since launch. A month later, the subscriber count would drop an additional 400,000 players to 1.3 million. Despite the strong launch and positive reviews from media outlets, SWTOR was trending down. Like many online games, time reveals all. While the story and narrative content was good, players had issues with the MMO, with many stating that the game felt like a single-player RPG with the MMO tacked on, pointing at the lack of endgame content and progression. By August 2012, rumors that the game would adopt a free-to-play model started to circulate. Nowadays, in the world of Fortnite and Apex, free-to-play doesn't mean anything other than you can play the game without paying. But back in 2012, there was a very negative connotation around the term, often looked down upon as a poor-quality game that would constantly block your play with paywalls looking to nickel and dime you at every turn. Further, having such a large project backed by an even larger organization going free-to-play was almost like admitting defeat. Players wouldn't have to wait long to have the rumors confirmed. In November 2012, the game announced it would be free to play. The official statement was that BioWare saw the subscription as an old age barrier for players, but the bleeding player base almost certainly had a role in that decision. The players were now categorized into tiers. Free-to-play players would have access to the base game with different restrictions, such as purchasing a ticket to play group content, a minus 25% XP penalty, and a credit cap. Preferred players, or those who had spent any money on the game, would have many restrictions lifted, and the subscriber who had perks such as early access to content and infinite respawn at death location. As a free-to-play player back in the day, I remember feeling restricted, such as not being able to sprint until a certain level, not receiving all the rewards from a quest, the limited inventory space, and respawning back at a medical droid on death. And I wasn't alone, with many players complaining that the game was, in reality, unplayable as a free-to-play player. This level of restrictions and strong arming was not uncommon for free-to-play games at the time, and EA had no reason to change, as in mid-2013, EA stated that SWTOR had doubled its revenue since going free-to-play, even though subscribers dropped to 500,000. The player base also grew by an additional 1.5 million players, so the change to free-to-play had worked for EA BioWare. SWTOR had increased its players and revenue. There was a solution to the restrictions for the free-to-play players that may not sound great but did work: becoming a preferred player, spending a little money in the shop or subbing for a month. Don't get me wrong, getting strong arm doesn't feel great, but you were able to play the base content for free, and if you decided this was a game you enjoyed and wanted to support, then elevating your tier wasn't the worst solution. And the preferred player status got rid of the overly restricted penalties on a free-to-play account. Again, not saying this is right or feels good, but it was the option most players took, myself included. Through the rest of 2013 and into 2014, BioWare released 3 expansions: Rise of the Hutt Cartel, Galactic Stronghold, and Galactic Starfighter. Compared to most in the MMO genre, these were relatively small expansions, but they did add features such as player housing, PvP starship battles, and a raised level cap. However, the first significant expansion will come at the end of 2014. Shadow of Raven added another large, fully voiced storyline and raised the level cap, along with additional group content and in-game activities. However, the biggest and arguably boldest change was making a lot of the group content able to complete it solo. This declared their intent on making Star Wars: The Old Republic an RPG first and an MMO second. To the people who wanted an out-and-out MMO, this was not the direction they wanted to see the game go in. However, to the more casual player enjoying the story, it wasn't bad. In fact, it was good. It also meant that SWTOR began to fill this awkward and unlikely niche of MMOs for single-player players. I know this sounds oxymoronic, but hear me out. One of the best things about an MMO is playing a character and creating stories for years. You continue to return to your character and that world as content gets added. Yes, single-player RPGs are large and can have lots of content, but there's always a limit, and things rarely get tweaked. And at some point, that story will end. But an MMO has endless potential. It's also fun to run into a social hub and see everyone running around. It feels like a living, breathing world, even if you never actually interact with anyone. And if you want to wanted to team up with your friends, you had that option. But on SWTOR, you didn't have to do anything you didn't want. You never hit a point in the story where you could only progress by completing group content. You never have to go through the process of looking for a group to get a few randoms together to complete the story. 2014 was an important year for Star Wars: The Old Republic. Despite the decline in subscribers, revenue continued to grow. But it was also the year that SWTOR found its identity. Early complaints were that the MMO aspect felt very tacked on, which disappointed the MMO audience. And these were valid complaints. But instead of trying to appease everyone and force themselves into doing something that perhaps they didn't feel confident in or just didn't fit their image for the game, they doubled down on what people liked about the game and what they were good at, creating strong, story-driven content that everyone could play through. And while it's understandably disheartening to the hardcore MMO crowd, it means that they got their answer, and it means that the people who play SWTOR know what the game is and enjoy it for what it is, instead of playing it hoping for change. This heavy emphasis on story and single-player RPG would continue in the subsequent expansions, Knights of the Fallen Empire, Knights of the Eternal Throne, and Onslaught. They introduced new content, raised the level cap, new planets, and player choice system in their quests. It also introduced a new looking for group finder. Filling this niche of single-player MMO meant that the player base would vary wildly. When a new expansion or patch is released, the player base shoots up for that month, then it continues to drop down until the next big patch. This fuels the ongoing cries of the game is dying. Now, these kinds of comments from a player base aren't rare. In fact, it's probably one of the things that SWTOR has in most common with other MMOs, but it's also just not true. As we've mentioned before, not only is the player base not as vital to SWTOR as it is in other MMOs, but it's still making money for EA. In 2019, SWTOR revenue hit almost $1 billion, so I don't believe it's going anywhere. But just because a game is making money and you can play it, doesn't mean you should play it, right? If you're the kind of player that rushes to max level, skipping all the cutscenes so you can start endgame content, also known as a WoW refugee, you're going to be disappointed. If your ambition in an MMO is to join the best raiding guild or top the PvP leaderboards, you can do that, but you're probably going to be disappointed. But if you want to play an MMO with a great story you can get lost in, an MMO where you can create a character and create stories that go on for years without needing to deal with appeasing others or elitist players, if you've bounced from MMO to MMO dreading the point of needing to go through LFG, then SWTOR might just be for you, and now might be the best time to jump in. SWTOR just celebrated its 10th anniversary. The latest expansion, Legacy of the Sith, is just around the corner, bringing some significant changes. Along with the expected raised level cap and added story content, Legacy of the Sith is coming with changes to classes, combat, modernized UI, and a better, less RNG loot system. If you're a seasoned MMO veteran tired of looking for the right people to play the game you enjoy, or just starting to peek into the online RPG world, I'd recommend SWTOR. It's free to check out, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon.
And when the galaxy is in flames, power will be yours, if you are willing to burn.